All right, folks, you're very welcome to the spring webinar series on DSS. Uh, this presentation tonight is with Kevin. Just for anyone that doesn't know this man, he has multiple senior county championships, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure he'll call me on it straight away. Sligo, where we're going, Galway, and we're going to Mayo. I've actually done a bit of research today. He's currently with Corofin and has had unbelievable success with Corofin. It's the webinar I'm actually currently really looking forward to tonight, especially on his game-based approach and development thinking. Just a small bit of housekeeping, guys. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, if I could ask you, just pop them into the chat box, and Kevin will answer any questions at the end of it. He said he'll stay till 12. There's no problem. Other than that, I'm going to hand you over to Kevin. I really hope he enjoys and gets something out of it. Same as myself. All right, Kevin, thank you, sir.
Thanks a million, Alan, and thanks again to Kieran as well for, I suppose, invite me onto the webinar tonight. And hopefully, I know giving up a Monday evening can be difficult, so hopefully, look, we'll go through this, and there's some nuggets for us all, really. And I suppose a bit of my own background, Alan mentioned in terms of my club experience, but I suppose where I really found my passion was through coach education, and it's something I got involved in very young. I was trained up as a coach educator with Galway and Connacht GAA in 2009, and throughout the time, I suppose I'm like when you're giving courses and you're working with so many different coaches, it's always a learning environment, and the nuggets you pick up from these type of webinars and from courses and everything, can be really, really beneficial. So look, hopefully there is something to take out of today, and that you'll bear with me for the next 40 minutes or so. So I suppose when Kieran first approached me, an area I am passionate about is the games-based approach. It is that buzzword now in GAA in both football and hurling, but it's trying to just look at it and trying to kind of look at it into more depth, I suppose, in what it is and how you can implement it in a game design. So tonight, the take-home messages is really looking at the principles of play and trying to understand them, implementing a games-based approach, planning a game design, and I suppose, which is really important is being able to adapt a team's games design. So that's the way I've broken up the webinar, and hopefully, look, you'll take something home from that. Just, I suppose, starting off, and it's something I think is really important that we always look back and we try to, look at other sports. And I think that's something, I suppose, more in recent times, I'm starting to do more and more of, is looking at invasion games and, how they're played. And you're talking like basketball, you're talking soccer, you're talking rugby. Any game really, I think, is defined as an invasion game if there's more than 5 aside, So look, Gaelic football is an invasion game. The reality is teams compete to attack their opponent's territory to score a goal or a point. And at the same time, teams defend zone 30 to prevent opposition scores a goal or a point. So like the game, when you look at it like that, is really, really simple. And I think sometimes what we tend to do is overtalk it or overcomplicate it at times. And I think, in coach education, I think it's always really important. And what I think with any team I work with is try to break it back to the basics and try to keep the game as simple as possible, because, the reality is every time you get the ball, you want to score, and that should be always the objective. You want to score, and that's, nothing else should matter every single time you get the ball. And to do that, obviously you have the transferable skills and your principles, strategies and tactics. And I've tried to relate all of those to what a game design looks like. So that's the idea, and that's what's something I will be passionate about with any teams I've ever worked with, whether it's school teams, academy teams, county underage teams, and club teams. Just moving the slides here now. uh, in coach education, when we go out to clubs and we talk with a lot of coaches, we break the game. This is taken. This image will be taken from one of our coach education booklets, and you look at it and you look at phase of play in the game, and I just think that this is very basic for a lot of coaches out there. We look at it. We look at attacking phase, defensive phase, and then our transition from defense to attack and attack to defense. But also within that, you have your set plays, throw in, kick out, sideline balls, and free kicks. So when you look at the image, the game again seems really simple. But for each of those phases, it's understanding our principles, understanding the difference with principles and tactics, and then implementing them on certain days against different opposition. And that's that's going to be always the biggest challenge. So we start kind of trying to understand our principles of play, and you can go on to any invasion game, whether it's basketball, soccer, rugby. The principles of play with the ball, without the ball, are all very similar, and they don't really change. Most teams' principles don't change. It's the tactics then that do change, and it's just to try to always understand the difference between both. So in any invasion games, there's core principles, and I really believe that coaches and players really knowing and understanding the core principles is the cornerstone of successful coaching. And the activities then in your training sessions are a reflection of your principles. So try to keep that in mind as I'm walking through kind of different examples. And I think that it's really important that our activities are linked to our core principles. And, again, when we talk about principles, it's all really based on with the ball and without the ball. So obviously your attacking principles are, you want to penetrate the opposition. To do that, you need support play. Space is massive in invasion games because you're always trying to create the space. And to be able to do that, you have to know where to move and at different times to move. And then obviously, I think a principle with every team in invasion games should be linked to some type of creativity, because that's the behavior and the style of play that you're not predictable, and that should be a given on any team, that attacking principle. On the same as similarly, defending principles, you have your delay, anticipation, your control, and then obviously while one side is trying to create the space, the opposite side is trying to deny the space. So you want to be really compact, and then about getting the balance right. So we look at those two types of principles when we're trying to plan games. We look at those principles in every training session, and they don't change. And then obviously you have your transition principles, and with attack, transition principles with defense. And, I often say is that being able to switch from both mindsets is a principle. It's something that is sometimes very, very difficult to coach, but it is possible to coach. And it's that idea of that light switch moment, that when you have the ball and you do get turned over, that you do have that moment that now you're a defender, that you don't have the ball anymore. And that how quick can you switch from attack to defense, and the same from defense to attack. And obviously, when you have the ball, you want to exploit the space. When you don't have the ball, you want to recover and make sure that your goal is protected. Transition with the ball, moving forward. Without the ball, moving back. We talk about width and depth a lot now in games, but sometimes we're seeing too much width and depth, especially in a transition. Maybe the width, you don't need it as much in transition, but you might need it more if an opposition is set up. And then obviously, what's more linked in going into your tactics, whether you're a team that likes to high press or whether you're a team that likes to slow the game and retain and control. So when you look at your principles, we like to try to have principles that don't change, while at the same time our tactics do change. And for a long, long time, I suppose, when I first got involved in coaching and teams, I wasn't fully aware of what my principles said and what my tactics was doing. And sometimes I even confused both. And I think the more experience I have and the more teams you work with and the more individuals you work with, you start being a lot more clear in your game design and what you want. And tactics allows a team to have a structure plan to allow the players that you have to adapt to situations within the game. So obviously, a rainy day will have a big impact on your tactics than a dry day. Your opponent's weaknesses and strengths and your own strengths and weaknesses should impact your tactics. And obviously, then within the game, you might have a man sent off. Have you a tactic for what you might be doing? Is there a tactic for if you're a man up? Obviously, different score lines. If you're chasing a game 2-3 points down going into injury time, how do you react? And they're all related to tactics, but yet your game principles should stay the same. And obviously, then that's linked to tactics is your formation and your style. And some teams will like to hold 2 forwards up, some will play 3 up, how they line up. And little things like that will always link to what you see the best version of yourself. And I think what's really important is your tactics should revolve around the players you have. While we see some teams seeing tactics being used in certain games and trying to implement them in their games, that isn't relevant to the conditions, maybe their own strengths and weaknesses. And that is where I sometimes feel that coaches, I don't like saying coaches get it wrong, but that sometimes lack the real clarity on the difference between the two. So that gives us a kind of introduction in terms of our principles and our tactics. And throughout the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to try to see how they link to game design. So that's the idea of this evening. And again, throughout that, I'm going to be throwing in some of my own experience with different teams I've worked with. And it is really, really tricky. And it's not something, you'll do overnight. And I'm very fortunate that I did say that I am involved going around the clubs with coach education and listening to what is happening in with different teams and at different ages. And it is very tricky because what I would have shown there 5 minutes ago with core principles, 90% of our coaches are aware of those, but it's transferring the knowledge into training sessions. That's very difficult. And I really think it's just the most important part of any coach design, game design, or as a coach, is that your sessions must reflect your own environment and your own context and what is happening in your context, because your context is not the same as mine. And that has to be the starting point, to be able to adapt to your reality. And when you work with different clubs and you work with different players, you start figuring out very, very quickly that what would have worked in with one group of players doesn't necessarily work with another. And that sometimes you have to adapt your coaching style to the group in front of you rather than the group in front of you adapt to your coaching style. And that's why I think the best coaches and the best managers, especially in the modern game, are able to adapt faster. They can adapt and they're aware and they have massive self-awareness. So, there's coaches on this webinar possibly from the ladies' game, from hurling, from underage. So therefore, your context is unique to you. So when you're listening to me and listening to webinars or, going on Twitter and going to coaching courses, always be aware of your own environment and your own reality. And I think I can't really stress that enough, because I think sometimes we have in the GAA, it is we are a very small country, and it's a sport that is, played all around the country, that our own environments are all very different. So that's why I suppose the games-based approach and being, one of those big buzzwords now in the GAA within Croke Park and in coach education, and there's a lot of study and there's a lot of research going into it. And I suppose I won't be coming from the research side. I'm more coming from my own experience side. But the reality is we want a culture where players are able to solve problems and find solutions within sessions. And probably better if it's not the coach finding the solutions for the player. Can we get our players to find the solutions within the sessions for themselves? So really what a games-based approach will do is it provides for the development of game appreciation, perceptual and tactical awareness, decision making. Really important to encourage creativity and skill mastery. Skill mastery doesn't have to be done in isolated drills. That can be done throughout games. And all the time, it's ensuring a greater relevance to competitive performance, because at the end of the day, we want training to replicate how we play in games. A game design, and the way kind of we look at it, is that we want our training to replicate match environments. I mean, any coach will go and say that. So therefore, the environment for your players involved you have to introduce constraints, conditions. Best way to do that is use what we call in GAA coach education the STEP-R model. S standing for space, big space, small space. Time, could be a 4-minute game, it could be a 6-minute game. E is for your equipment, cones, small goals, big goals, poles. P, the personnel. Any game, 3 aside, 4 aside, 6 aside, 15 aside, fun games. And R, modifying the rules. So you could have 1 play, or you could have 2 plays, depending, or 5 seconds moving forward, whatever. You can put a time limit in on it. So using a STEP-R model allows you to condition a game for what you want within your context. But what's, again, from the coaching point, it's vital that you have a clear focus, or you end up watching everything and you end up seeing nothing. And I love that line, because that is the most important thing on game design, is that there is always a clear focus. So going back on game design, we talk about having that focus. So when you're going out with a training plan, having a team, the skills within that team that's necessary, the principles that don't change, and then your tactics depending on the conditions, who you're playing, the players that you've available to you, and the time of the game. So kind of keeping that in mind as I'm going through this practical examples. So I like this, as coaches, we want to guide and shape rather than dictate. So we're not always given the answers. We're trying to empower our players to be coming up with the answers, and trying to get them to lead. And not only do they understand the game, we want them to understand in game and the situation that's presented to them at that particular time. Because obviously in the first half has different situations than the second half, because as the second half is moving on, time is moving on, and therefore the consequences are much, much bigger. So what does the team look like? It looks like a phase of play. We'll identify, I'm going to do one with the ball and one without the ball as an example. We develop an initial activity to exemplify the team. And then as coaches, we use observations and questioning skills at different times throughout the session. And then if it's gone to plan, we want opportunities for feedback to explore the team, the principles, and the tactics. So we're just going to watch this clip, and this is of a Dublin Meath game, and Dublin has just turned over the ball, and this is called, in GAA terms, it's a counter-attack. Okay, so as coaches, when you visualize the best version of yourselves with your team, that's as good as it gets. We all would love to see that version of ourselves and within our teams. I've taken an example of one of the best teams, if not the best team in the country. That is a counter-attack. What they're doing is the player, James McCarthy, they got on the ball in his third. The first thing he did was lift his head. He gives the ball and he goes. So it's give and it's go. He supports the play. He doesn't get the next ball back. He doesn't get the next ball back. He gets the third pass back. At the same time, what we're not aware of in the clip is that there's movement off the ball to create the space for the support player runner. So the corner forward is gone completely out of the picture because he's trying to create the space. So in training, can we try to replicate that? So my example I'm just picking is the team, which is with the ball. It's a counter attack. The skills necessary is the ball technique. Obviously, the first touch by James McCarthy and the hand pass to the first player, that first touch is vital for you to be able to attack at pace. The movement of the player on the ball requires evasion skills. It requires being able to dummy. It requires to be able to pick up speed. But at the same time, the movement of the ball requires players to try to influence the game, even if they know they're not getting the ball. The positioning of those players, and then the person on the ball to be able to scan, and the person off the ball being able to scan to try to create the space. So there's an awful lot of skills actually going on. But where I would have got confused when I would have been early days of coaching is I would have been always linking skills to on the ball. When I think now we have to try to link skills to on and off the ball. Principles in that clip would look like the second Dublin turned over the ball, it went from defense mindset to an attacking mindset. The support play, the creation of space, and the creativity, which, if you remember, I would have had in my principles back a few slides ago. Tactics then will obviously depend on the conditions, because if it's a really wet, windy day, you may not be able to move the ball as fast. The ball could be very heavy. The strength and weaknesses of the opposition, because some oppositions will just completely drop back, and that means you can be moving forward on a counter attack, but it's very hard to get support because there might be 14, 15 men behind the ball. And then obviously, what situation is the game it's in? So again, it's linking the theme of my session, skills necessary, the principles we use, and the tactics. So I really thought it was really important. I gave a very simple example to try to relate it to your context. So this is a very basic drill. It's a game we call a fast transitional game. So you might have it at the in line to the 45, break it up into 3 zones, and you might have 3 players in zone 1, 3 players in zone 2, 3 players in zone 3. Now there's 9 players. You could have it 5-5-5, 6-6-6. The numbers doesn't matter. What you're just trying to instill into the group is that when we have the ball, we want to attack at pace. So the team in zone 2 attacks the goal, very simple, and they want to score a goal. We put a time limit on it to make it move a little bit faster, because we want the mindset to be attack. So we might say 5 seconds to score, or 5 seconds to get into the opposition attack zone, and then you can score within whatever time. So you now have patience and you're attacking at the same time. So where does this game link with the clip I showed a couple of minutes ago is that when you have the ball in zone 2, you're trying to score into zone 1 there, and you get turned over or you shoot, the team in zone 1 goes fast with support runners, all move in different directions to zone 3, and they now attack zone 3. At the same time, the team that was in zone 2 are not allowed continue play. So what it means is it's always one team v another team, and it's always based on fast transition. The key is a very simple drill, but the key is the coaching points. As a coach, can you identify, or can you speak to your players about the importance of the quick decisions? So what you want from your players is the head up. You want your players to be aware that the very first pass away should be forward, and it's key. The players themselves should be using body shape to get themselves in the best possible position to receive the ball and go. And at all times, you want them to be scanning to check their surroundings. On the ball, speed of the ball carrier, develop an evasion technique, And then off the ball, we want to be going at pace, creating space, and have decoy runs. All in a very, very simple 9-player drill. But you can go to 10-player, 11, 12, whatever you want. I've now just progressed it to typically what just happened in the clip a few minutes ago is that the exact same drill now is using more space. We can actually now have 10 players in zone 1, 10 players in zone 2, 10 players in zone 3, and implement the exact same scenario, the same conditions, but now it's a lot more real. That when you turn over the ball in zone 3, you go at pace into zone 2, you're taking on zone 2 and you're trying to score, but now you're using a full pitch. And again, the coaching points stay the same, but it's now very relevant to what we saw in the Dublin clip. And people will come to me and they'll come to you, Alan, and they'll come to, a lot of, they'll go onto websites looking for games all the time. That's an awful simple game that you can adapt to your situation to try to introduce fast transitional play. And then at the end of your session or at the end, you just say to your players and ask the questions because you're trying to develop the thinking player. Is it relevant to what we are trying to do in our game? If we're a fast moving team, can you run to create the space for the ball carrier? Can you beat your man? Where should you go to create the space, or where is the space? And those type of questions means the players have to be thinking. But if you can get them to see the relevance of that in your game, that is when real learning, and that's when real understanding happens. So I hope that, I may not have explained the drill great, but what I'm just trying to say is that it doesn't matter the drill, and we should not get bogged down on the drills. We should understand the context of why we're doing it. And once we have the why are we doing it, and the players see why we're trying to do it, you can condition it any way you want. So that's a nice example of with the ball, and obviously support, transition, scanning, all those skills are necessary. And sometimes I often see in a lot of trainings that could work on the top of the pitch, and you could be developing the skills at the other side and rotate them. So you could be talking about scanning and first touch, quick decisions, maybe with 12 players on one end of the pitch, playing that game on the other end and rotate them. So there's constantly linking with your skills based and then trying to implement them in games. So moving on, I just kind of want to keep it kind of fresh, to keep it in your minds that this is now without the ball. So this is now a different type of video. And Fermanagh against Armagh. Armagh are very aggressive. They're all marking their man, but to have an extra player in that side of the pitch, hunting in packs, massive intensity, really big work rate, swarming the ball. The transition now, 5 players are all facing forward. 6 players, 7 players, all moving at pace. And it's a goal. So again, what we would all love to implement into our games, love to implement it in our teams, but it's just looking at it and saying, how could I do that? So we go back to our game design. The team now of my session changes. This could be a week away or 2 weeks away. It's now focused on without the ball. And my team is the high press. So what Armagh was doing in that clip, they were pressing really high, trying to really, really suck the life out of Fermanagh. The skills, tackling, blocking, body positioning, angle defending. Your principles is to be able to go from the attack mindset, maybe the previous minute, to now a defense mindset. You have to be able to delay, and you want to be able to deny the space. And obviously, the tactics will have an impact, how much you will do that high press, depending on whether it's a very strong wind, no wind, your strengths, your weaknesses, and obviously the game circumstances. Because if you're in injury time and you're a point down, that would be a really good tactic to try to get the ball back. So an awful simple game here again to try to give you an idea. So it's a 4v4 game this time. And we have attackers and defenders standing at the 4 cones. On the signal, The defenders might run just towards the goal 5-6 meters, maybe go down in a press up just to give the forwards a little opportunity. And on my second signal, the 4 forwards with 1 ball tries to take on the 4 defenders. Now, there's no pressing there. That's just to get the drill started. But the second the attacker shoots or get turned over, what you're trying to implement is the attackers to light switch moment. We're now gone from attack to defense. Everyone has to be aware of their man. There's tracking involved. There's body positioning to delay their man. The 3Ds of tackling: delay, deny, dispossess. Touch tight defending is massive. So every single player, the second the ball was turned over, has to be switched completely on to now we're in defense mindset. We have to know where our man is and we press. Can we double up? Clear and concise communication is absolutely massive in this drill, because if one player presses and the other doesn't, that's going to leave the space for the opposition to overlap you on the other side of the pitch. So what has to really happen is that when one player presses, every other player has to press as a unit. And it's like a chain reaction. And I think that type of drill turns into the mindset of being able to react fast on a turnover and be able to press high up the pitch. Really, really simple drill. But you're asking your players, why do you think we're doing it? What you will love to hear from your players is, because we're high up a pitch, if we can turn over an opposition up here, we have a better chance of getting a goal, because the opposition is not, they're unstructured. They're not set up. So it's a brilliant drill to get a goal. What does Armagh do against Fermanagh in that clip? They pressed high. They were willing to put an extra player up to mark the goalkeeper, which meant there was no out ball, 5-on-4, and all of us, well, it was 5-on-5 including the keeper, but they got the turnover and they got the goal. The reward justified the means in that situation. Go back to your players. What does good body position look like? Let them come back. Being on your side sometimes is an awful lot better than being on your front. Why? Because side can allow you go 2 ways. The mindset. How do we react after losing the ball? You want your players to switch on and to be able to answer. We switch from attack to defense. So that gives you an idea. So hopefully, I suppose, those very basic drills gives you an idea how you can implement them into your context for your team. And I suppose then, and this kind of finishes, what I'm trying to say is that having your team and having your skills and understanding your principles and understanding your tactics, that's all fine. But then as a coach, what's really, really important is that you don't arrive to your training session, set up your game, go in as a referee and sit back. There's time, and let the players off, and we want them to. But it's very, very important that the coach understands how to adapt different situations in the game to challenge more or to maybe not challenge as much, depending on your context and the group you have. But being able to adapt a team's game design allows players to explore different ways to win the game. You know, maybe coaching cues rather than telling. It will help develop the thinking player. It will also help develop the in-game understanding. It helps you as a coach to change things up. And we call this scenario-based coaching. So sometimes we change the games to we're 2 points up, we're 2 points down, we're a man up, we're a man down. We're starting from the sideline, we're starting from a kick out. All different real-life scenarios that happens in games. The best coaches are always thinking on their feet. They might have come into the session with a plan and a team and the principles, and they understand all that. But the session can sometimes take a life of its own, and allow it to take a life of its own, and get players to explore the ways to win the game when it hasn't gone to plan. Because in the biggest games that your team will play in a year, there will be moments of chaos, there will be moments of madness, and you want your players to be problem solving that themselves, because you will not be able to control that on the sideline. You can control substitutes, You can control formation. You cannot control referee decisions. You cannot control the weather. And you can't control or micromanage every part of a game. You got to trust your players. So your game design needs to reflect that. And I think the biggest change with me personally in the last 10 years as a coach is my observation and communication skills. I'm learning more and more what is real observation in game and in training. And I love this. And I took this from the FA website, which is a brilliant learning website. But what it is about observation is trying to notice what is actually happening and not just following the ball. What it does for you, really good observation as a coach, allows you to discover the areas to work on in your game, because the areas to work on in your game is very different than the opposition's game and every other team you might work with. Observation allows you to understand your players. It allows you to understand your players' abilities and inabilities. Because at the same time, what I spoke about in the last 30, 40 minutes is all about the collective. The reality is you have to have the players that be able to implement your game design, and being able to individually coach, get individual players, being able to move left and being able to move right and being able to kick left and kick right gives you a lot more flexibility as a coach. And that's where it's really important to be able to have good observation skills. And that in itself will help guide your decision making, your actions and your behaviors. And then obviously, and I always finish with this, is that communication. And I hope in that time, I'm not sure how long I've got on here, but it's really important that you try to keep it simple, use simple and effective language, keep concepts really simple, and, you know, always being able to sometimes even admit when something hasn't gone wrong, or when something has gone wrong, to put your hand up and be able to quickly identify that and try to change. So, you know, as coaches, sometimes we can get very down on ourselves and we can kind of, you know, get down when games, if you don't win games and you look at yourself. But the reality is losing games, winning games are all more opportunities to learn. And there are more opportunities to go back to your game design and tweak and adapt and be better all the time. So look, as I said, I think that was roughly just over under the 40 minutes. And I like keeping these type of webinars short, because I think from a viewer's point of view, the most important nugget you can take today really is your context is the key. So Alan, I hope that was something. I hope it was short, but what I like to think was that there was some nuggets there. And if you have any questions, or if any questions come in, I'm very, very happy to kind of answer anything you might have there.
No, Kevin, excellent. Very, very good. I've took a lot of nuggets out of that myself. I was hopping on and off and trying to take notes on the phone at the same time. I was trying to watch anything else. But listen, guys, if there is any questions, please pop them into the chat box. I'm sure Kevin will answer them for you. It's an excellent presentation in terms of, I suppose, even for the understanding of the principles and kind of from Kevin's experience. I suppose Kevin's been at it 10 plus years, as he said now, and I suppose every day is a learning day. So even after multiple championship wins and success he's had, I suppose he hasn't just stopped. He's constantly learning and developing, which is always great to see in coaches and managers. So guys, if you've any questions, pop away and I'm sure we can help you out. We'll stay on for 5 or 10 minutes. And if it's the case that you don't feel comfortable on the call, popping a message in, you can pop myself a message through DSS and I can get in touch with Kevin and we can relay hopefully a bit of information back to you.
Kevin, Barry here. Can I ask a question there?
Yeah, Barry, how are you keeping?
Great. Just in terms when you're coaching the game, like how vocal are you? So are you constantly on them, or do you let them play the game and then stop it, maybe deliver a quick message or ask them a question and then let them at it again? Are you always just even saying like great ball, good pass or whatever? Or
yeah, I suppose it's interesting, and I'm going to answer it in two ways. So when I first started coaching, I would have refed an awful lot of the game. So I actually switched from a coaching mind to a referee's mind, and I started following the ball, and I started blowing for frees and doing what a ref is meant to do. And what it started to do was my observation then was all on the ball. So I suppose I had to stand back from, and really when I thought about it, I go, I'm not coaching here, I'm reffing. So I try to differentiate between that first of all. So what I tend to do now is do less reffing and allow someone else ref, and then I am the coach. So I am actually looking what's happening on and off the ball. So I'm letting the play continue, but I might walk over, say like when it's the other side of the pitch, I might walk over to a forward, say the other side, and talk to them. Where's the ball right now? Where should you be? If that gets turned over, where could you run into? So you're not stopping the play, and the play is still continuing, but you're still allowing yourself to get more influence. You're trying to coach and guide players around the pitch rather than reffing. Does that make sense? So that's something I've tried an awful lot more to do, to step back and observe more rather than try to just ref the games. When I tend to rep, sorry, does that answer the question in one way, Barry?
It does, definitely. And what about, would you have the same view of, say, if you're coaching say a 6-on-6, would you stand back and let them play the game rather than ref it? Like, I mean, you might have the condition might be whatever condition you want to put into it, whether you had to make something from a hurling point of view. You could have a striking game, and it could be stick pass, hand pass. So a hand pass, if you receive a hand pass, you must give a stick pass, right? So you've set out the condition. Do you just leave the players off then in the, say, the small sided game, or do you have the same view? Do you stand back?
No, it might be a little bit different. I like being a little bit more hands-on in the smaller number drills, because the smaller number drills, it's really important that they do understand, that what you emphasize at the start doesn't have to be rules. It might be just what you're saying there. It might be like one hand pass followed by then a strike, or every second one. It's really important then that what you've emphasized that they're actually doing, because that will even show for learning as well. But the important thing is, if you're bringing in a condition, what's lovely to do at some stage, maybe halfway through, if it's a 5-minute drill at 2.5 minutes, ask them, why am I bringing in this condition? The condition has to have a purpose. So there's no point just bringing in, like say in football, a hand pass followed by a kick pass, because I'm trying to go through for the next 5 minutes. You want to have that a purpose in your game. So what's really important is then 2.5 minutes, when you bring them in, or 3 minutes or whatever time it is, and you bring them in and you say, why am I actually doing this? And if they can answer to you why you're doing it, the next 3 minutes is going to raise another level again, because now everyone is conscious. Because for the first 3 minutes, I will guarantee you 2 or 3 would know why you're bringing it in, 2 or 3 wouldn't have a clue, and 2 or 3 are just going through the motions. So the next time you'll play, when they're all really clear on why you've brought in the condition, there's a way more learning and a way more relevance to your game. So I think definitely there's a time, I feel, in drills and games that, they may not actually see what I'm trying to get here. Get them in and ask them why you're doing it. But I love trying to relate every single 2-a-side, 5-a-side, 10-a-side to how you want to play as a coach.
Sound, that's really good. Thanks a million, Kevin.
No problem.
Kevin, I have a couple of questions coming in here for you as well. I don't know if you can see them. The first one is, do you tend to use the same similar games over and over again, or do you look to change games in each session, i.e. new games all the time? So is it constant repetition of games, or do you try and be, I suppose, creative in every session you do? It's something different.
Yeah, like, again, you're trying to get the balance always right in your sessions. I'm very fortunate, I'm working with a team at the moment that has absolutely brilliant coaches. So when you're working with a group and you have 3, 4 really, really good coaches, it really gives you an awful lot more scope of creativity and trying to be also all on the same page. It's really important you have your coaches and everyone is on the same page. But I think a typical game design would, a training design is a bit different than a game design. But when you go into a training, we would often start, with those small rondo type drills. So there's loads and loads of touches. There's loads of games involved in those, that when you then come out of that after 20 minutes, we'll often go straight into a full side game and go from the full side game into maybe a small sided game. And that small sided game will always have a key theme, whether it's with the ball or without the ball. And that's really, really important. But we do replicate a lot of our drills, because what's really important is mastery of what you're trying to do. But we do it same language, but it might be different parts of the pitch with different scenarios based to it. But we would never be more than a minute trying to explain a drill. It would be very, very clear. You have your teams, emphasize 2 or 3 key points, and we're ready to go. There'd be very, very little trying to explain you go here or you go there. To be nothing like that.
Good stuff. Another question in from Deck. He said, how do you encourage players to give feedback, take the lead? Himself, he's a talker, struggles with silence. So when he asks players for the feedback on a game they're playing, it's probably always kind of the same people that are talking. So how is that same environment for you in terms of when you have players? Is it the same 3 or 4 lads that always speak up and talk, or how do you work it?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, because again, it's every team is different, and like every single team will have this, 2 or 3 players are vocally very, very clear on how the game is played, and they understand the game, and they might be very experienced, and they may have won a lot as well. So I think what's really important is that there is always there's always a facility that younger players can talk, but they won't always talk in a group. But what's really important is for feedback, it doesn't actually have to be at the end of a session. You could also do sometimes debrief sheets, or you could have a little form maybe at the end of every 4 weeks. What went well? What did you like about training? Feedback like that. So it could be anonymous even. You could put in a quick form into a WhatsApp group or something like that. Now, you don't want to be doing them at the end of every session, but it sometimes really gives you an insight what more quiet players, an anonymous form, very simple feedback after maybe 4 weeks, what went well, what was the key learning you had in the last 4 weeks. You'll get they love that type of environment, because they can do it anonymous and they can do it without feeling they're saying the wrong things. Not even young players, some players hate in a group feeling that they don't understand something, but it's really important, you as a coach, is that you're very, very open, that they are approachable, that they can always come to you, whether it's one-on-one. Feedback doesn't have to be always within a group. It can be one-on-one, 2-on-2. And sometimes a lot of teams will use different leadership groups, that sometimes the more vocal players might take a group of 2 or 3 younger lads under their wing, and that the younger lads feel comfortable giving them feedback and asking, giving them the feedback. So they're little tips and tricks that different teams would do.
Yeah, I've 2 last ones for you, sir. Quick question from Clara. How do you structure your questioning at the end of each small-sided game?
Yeah, so I think the first one is always the same. The first one is, how is this relevant to the way we want to play? So, for instance, in Clara, you want what? So your personnel, your players best. The players know each other best. How do we want to play in it? How does this game relate to us? And I think that's always a good question, because when the players see how the small-sided game is related to how they want to play, there's like the learning already is taken off. The other, I suppose, question I would always use is the why. Why did you move here? Or why did you try to, why did you block his run? Little things like that can become more, can help develop more awareness. So I think little questions like why, having why in it is brilliant for teaching and for learning.
And the last question, sir, what are you looking for in skill warm-up games like kick pass followed by hand pass? So essentially what I'm thinking, Derek, is asking, what do you particularly focus on as a coach or manager when you're doing your own warm-up, the skill side of things? I hope I'm getting that right, Derek.
You see, skills are all related. So the idea of body positioning is absolutely massive when it comes to ball skills, because how you hold your body, being able to move left and right, then so they're all linked. And I think sometimes as coaches, we go in and we, you do a kicking drill or a hand passing drill. It's all based on, we talk about first touch, make it stick, and all that kind of, language we would use. But sometimes without the ball in your warm up, doing body positioning and moving, being able to get your players to be able to move. Movement skills are absolutely massive leading into ball skills. And I think an awful lot of teams do an awful lot with the ball skills, but the lack on the movement side of things. And I think trying to get that balance right is really important. So I think, what do I look out for? We would have coaches that are really, really high level thinkers in the movement side of things and qualified in that area. And they would break things down into real simplistic language, but movement skills will be, viewed as a really, really important skill on every single ball drill we would do.
Thank you, sir. That's it, Kevin. You can go now and enjoy a cup of tea. Listen, excellent webinar. I can't thank you enough from all of us in the DSS for coming on. We hope to have you on board again. For anyone that has missed it, we will get it up online in the coming days as well. But Kevin, from all of us at DSS, I want to thank you very much for hopping on tonight and presenting an excellent webinar. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks to those who logged on.